The dirty rag hit me square in the chest before I even had time to react. It was wet, cold. It smelled like dish soap and something sour underneath, like it had been sitting at the bottom of the sink for days. I caught it on reflex, both hands closing around the damp fabric, and I just stood there in the middle of the kitchen with this disgusting rag pressed against my brand new ivory blouse, the one I'd carefully picked out for our first morning as a married couple. And I looked up at my husband of less than 18 hours. Brandon was standing by the counter, arms crossed, wearing the same expression I'd later learned to recognize as his default setting around me. Bored, slightly contemptuous, like I was a minor inconvenience he hadn't gotten around to dealing with yet. His mother, Linda, was sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee, not even pretending to look away. She watched the whole thing with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who'd been waiting for this moment for a long time. "Welcome to the family," Brandon said. His voice was completely flat. No anger, no heat, just a statement of fact, the way you'd tell someone the Wi-Fi password. Get to work. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't throw the rag back at him, which, believe me, I have thought about approximately 10,000 times since. I just nodded. This small, automatic nod, like my body was trying to smooth things over before my brain had even caught up. And I walked out of the kitchen. By 6 o'clock that evening, the house was empty. Not of furniture, not of his mother's ceramic rooster collection or the framed photos of Brandon at his high school graduation, or the ancient lazy boy recliner that had been in the living room so long it had left permanent indentations in the carpet. All of that was still there. What was gone was every single person who had been inside that house when I walked out of the kitchen with that rag in my hands. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because if I start the story there, with the rag, with Brandon's face, with Linda's coffee mug, you're going to wonder how in the world I ended up in that kitchen in the first place. And honestly, that's the question that kept me up at night for a long time. How does a reasonably intelligent woman with a good job, good friends, and a perfectly functional life end up standing in her mother-in-law's kitchen on the first morning of her marriage, catching a dirty rag thrown at her by the man she just promised to love for the rest of her life? The answer is, gradually, and then all at once. My name is Ashley. I'm 31 years old. I grew up in Naperville, Illinois, the kind of suburb where every house has a 2-car garage and a Ring doorbell and an HOA newsletter that comes out twice a month with stern reminders about lawn maintenance. My parents, Carol and Dennis, have been married for 34 years. My dad coached Little League. My mom made her famous green bean casserole every Thanksgiving and took it so seriously that she once drove 40 minutes to a different grocery store because they were out of the specific brand of fried onions she needed. I grew up thinking that's just what families looked like. Steady, warm, a little boring in the best possible way. I graduated from the University of Illinois with a degree in accounting, moved to Chicago, passed my CPA exam on the first try, and by the time I was 28, I was a senior associate at a mid-sized firm in the Loop, making $74,000 a year, contributing to my 401k like a responsible adult, and sharing a 2-bedroom apartment in Wicker Park with my best friend Jen. My life was not glamorous, but it was mine. I had a savings account with actual money in it. I had a 5-year plan. I had a cast iron skillet I was genuinely proud of and a standing Sunday morning FaceTime call with my mom. I met Brandon Kowalski at a work event in the spring of 2 years ago. His company was one of our firm's clients. He was in commercial real estate, which sounds impressive until you understand that in practice, it mostly meant he drove around in a leased Chevy Tahoe and took clients to lunch and occasionally signed his name on documents that other people had prepared. But he was charming. God, he was charming. He had this easy, unhurried way of talking that made you feel like he had all the time in the world for you specifically. He remembered details, what you'd mentioned offhand 3 conversations ago, the name of your dog, the fact that you'd said you wanted to try that new Thai place on Milwaukee Avenue. On our 3rd date, he brought flowers. Real ones, not a gas station bouquet. A proper arrangement from a florist, with a card that said, I looked them up, and apparently these are called ranunculus. I thought they seemed like you. I kept that card in my nightstand for months. I thought it was the most thoughtful thing anyone had ever done for me. We dated for 14 months before he proposed. He did it on a Saturday morning in Millennium Park. No audience, no flash mob, no Instagram setup. Just the two of us and a ring that he'd clearly put thought into. A simple oval diamond on a thin gold band. Exactly what I would have picked for myself. I said yes before he even finished the sentence. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely get the word out. I can't believe this is my life, I told Jen that night, sitting on our kitchen counter with a glass of champagne, still staring at my left hand every 30 seconds like the ring might disappear if I stopped checking. It feels too good. Don't do that, Jen said, pointing at me with her champagne flute. Don't jinx it. Just let it be good. I should have listened to my own instincts. Because here's the thing I kept smoothing over in my head. The thing I kept finding reasonable explanations for. I had never really spent time with Brandon's mother. In 14 months of dating, I'd met Linda exactly 3 times. Once at a birthday dinner for Brandon's cousin, once at Christmas, and once when she came into the city for a doctor's appointment and Brandon insisted we all have lunch together. Each time, she'd been pleasant enough on the surface, polite, well-dressed, the kind of woman who always has her lipstick on and her house perfectly clean. But there was something underneath the politeness that I couldn't quite name. A watchfulness. A way of looking at me that felt less like curiosity and more like assessment. At that Christmas dinner, I'd brought a homemade pecan pie. I'd spent 2 hours on it. Linda had looked at it, smiled, said, "How thoughtful," and set it on the counter next to 3 other desserts, and I never once saw it come out. When I mentioned it to Brandon on the drive home, not complaining, just noting it, he'd said, "She probably just didn't want too many sweets. She's watching her sugar." And I'd said, "Of course, yeah, that makes sense." And I'd believed it, or I'd made myself believe it. That was my pattern with Brandon, I understand now. Something would happen that made a small, quiet alarm go off somewhere in the back of my mind, and I would reach for the nearest reasonable explanation and hold on to it like a life raft. Because the alternative, sitting with the discomfort, asking the harder question, felt like a threat to something I wasn't ready to lose. Our wedding was on a Saturday in late October. 72 guests. A venue in the western suburbs that had been a barn in a previous life. String lights everywhere. A playlist that Jen and I had spent 3 weekends perfecting. My dress was simple and ivory and cost more than I want to admit. My dad cried during the father-daughter dance, which made me cry, which made my mom cry from her seat. Brandon's vows were beautiful. He looked at me the whole time he said them, and his voice didn't waver, and I thought, this is it. This is the beginning of everything. We didn't go on a honeymoon right away. Brandon said we'd plan something for the spring, somewhere warm, maybe Costa Rica or Tulum. In the meantime, we were staying at his mother's house for a few days, while the lease on our new apartment in Oak Park finalized. Linda had offered. Brandon had accepted without really asking me. I hadn't pushed back because it was only supposed to be 3 days, and I was trying to be flexible, trying to be the kind of wife who didn't make everything a negotiation. 3 days. That's all it was supposed to be. I went to sleep on my wedding night in the guest room of Linda Kowalski's house in Elmhurst, Illinois, with my new husband beside me, and 72 people's worth of love and goodwill still warm in my chest. And I thought, 3 days. Easy. We can do anything for 3 days. I woke up the next morning to the sound of Linda moving around in the kitchen directly below us. And something in that sound, the particular way the cabinet doors closed, slightly too hard, each one, made that small, quiet alarm go off again somewhere in the back of my mind. I told myself it was nothing. I got up. I put on my ivory blouse. I went downstairs. And that's when Brandon threw the rag. I stood in the upstairs hallway for a long time after that. Not long in terms of actual minutes, maybe 4, 5 at the most, but the kind of long where every second has weight to it, where you're aware of each breath you take and the way the floorboards feel under your feet, and the fact that somewhere below you, a woman is drinking her coffee and her son is probably already scrolling his phone, and neither of them is wondering where you went. I still had the rag in my hand. I didn't even realize it until I looked down and saw it, damp, gray, slightly pink from some old dish soap stain, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not grief exactly, more like a slow, grinding recognition, the way a key turns in a lock that's never quite worked right. I set the rag on the edge of the bathroom sink. I washed my hands. I looked at myself in the mirror above Linda's guest bathroom for a long moment. The ivory blouse with a faint wet mark across the front now, my hair still neat from yesterday's updo with a few strands loose, my eyes slightly too wide. Okay, I said out loud to the mirror, very quietly. Not to pump myself up, more like I was checking that I was still in there. Then I went back downstairs. Brandon was at the kitchen table now, across from his mother. Linda had refilled her coffee. There was no mug set out for me. Brandon had his phone in one hand and a piece of toast in the other, and he didn't look up when I came in. Linda glanced at me once, that same measuring look, and then returned her attention to her coffee. I pulled out a chair and sat down. "I'd love some coffee," I said. My voice came out even. I was almost surprised. Linda looked at me. "The pot's right there," she said, and nodded toward the counter. Not unkind exactly, just utterly matter of fact, the way you'd tell a person where the light switch was. I got up and got myself a mug from the cabinet. I had to open 3 before I found them, and poured my own coffee and sat back down. And then I looked at Brandon. "Can we talk?" I said. He finished chewing his toast. He set his phone down, slowly, with the deliberate energy of someone doing you a favor. "About what?" "About this morning." "What about it?" I kept my voice very level. "You threw a rag at me." He blinked at me, and I swear to God, the expression on his face was genuine confusion. Like I'd just said something in a foreign language. "I tossed it to you. You needed something to clean up with." I didn't need anything to clean up. I had just walked into the kitchen. The counters needed wiping down. He picked his phone back up. "Mom was going to do it, but she's got her hip thing. I figured you wouldn't mind." "You figured I wouldn't mind," I repeated. "Ashley." He said my name the way you say it to a child who's being unreasonable, drawn out, patient in a way that's actually impatient. "It's a kitchen. It needs to be cleaned. You're here. I don't understand what the issue is." I looked at Linda. She was looking into her coffee mug with great interest. "The issue," I said carefully, "is that we got married yesterday. And this morning, the first thing that happened was you threw something at me and told me to get to work. In front of your mother, on the first day of our marriage." There was a silence. Outside, a neighbor's leaf blower started up. The refrigerator hummed. "You're being dramatic," Brandon said. Those 3 words landed in my chest like something with weight. Not because they were the cruelest thing anyone had ever said to me, but because of how easily they came out. How automatic. Like he'd been storing them up, preloaded, just waiting for the first moment I pushed back on anything. "I'm going to go for a walk," I said. I stood up, took my coffee mug, and walked out the back door onto Linda's small concrete patio. I sat in one of the plastic lawn chairs and I drank my coffee and I stared at her backyard. A rectangle of November brown grass, a bird feeder that needed refilling, a single ornamental kale plant in a pot by the fence. And I tried to think clearly. I pulled out my phone and texted Jen. "Hey, are you around?" The 3 dots appeared almost immediately. "Always. What's wrong?" I stared at the screen for a second. Then I typed, "Just a rough morning. Can we talk later?" "Call me anytime. I mean it. You okay?" "Yeah," I typed. "I think so." I wasn't sure that was true. The rest of that first day had a strange quality to it. Stretched and slightly unreal, like being in a waiting room for something you couldn't name. Brandon left around noon to meet a client, which on a Sunday meant something I didn't examine too closely. Linda moved around the house in her quiet, efficient way, doing things that I kept trying to help with and getting gently but firmly redirected. Not told to stop, just maneuvered out of the way. "I've got it," she'd say when I reached for the laundry basket. "You don't know where things go yet." "I can learn," I'd say. "No need," and she'd be gone down the hall. At one point, I offered to run to the grocery store. I'd noticed the fridge was low on a few things, and it felt like something useful I could do. Linda gave me a look that lasted just a beat too long and said, "Brandon usually handles the shopping." "Oh," I said. "Okay, I can ask him. He'll do it when he gets back." She turned back to the counter. "Don't worry about it." By 3 o'clock, I was sitting in the guest room with my suitcase open, doing absolutely nothing, just staring at the wall. My wedding dress was in a garment bag hanging on the back of the closet door. The ring on my left hand caught the light from the window and threw a small, bright point on the ceiling, and I watched it for a while. I called Jen. She picked up on the first ring. "Okay, talk," she said. I told her about the rag. I told her about Brandon's response. I told her about the coffee, the laundry basket, the grocery store. And as I described it all out loud, I heard myself trying to arrange it into something smaller than it was, trying to find the framing that made it just an awkward first day, just the weirdness of being in someone else's house, just the adjustment period. Jen let me finish. Then she said, "Ashley, what does your gut say?" I didn't answer right away. "Ash, it says something's wrong," I said, "but I don't know what yet. And I keep thinking, maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I'm still just tired from the wedding. Maybe it's the house, being in Linda's space. Everyone's still adjusting." "He threw a dirty rag at you," Jen said, "on your first morning. Not because he was angry. Not even because he was being thoughtless in a careless, oblivious way. He did it deliberately. And then he told you to get to work. And then when you brought it up, he called you dramatic." She paused. "That's a lot of information about a person." "I know. Do you?" I looked at the ring on my hand. "Jen, we just got married." "I know you did, baby." Her voice was soft. "I know." We stayed on the phone for another 20 minutes. She didn't tell me what to do. She just stayed on the line. And that was enough for the moment. Brandon came home at 5:30 with a paper bag from a deli, sandwiches, 3 of them, already wrapped, and set them on the kitchen table like he was dropping off a delivery. "Dinner," he said, to no one in particular, and went upstairs. I sat across from Linda at the kitchen table, and we ate our sandwiches in near silence. She asked me once if I wanted mustard. I said no thank you. That was the full extent of our conversation. After dinner, I cleaned up, not because anyone asked me to, but because I needed something to do with my hands. I was standing at the sink rinsing the plates when Linda came up behind me and stood there for a moment. I felt her presence before I heard her. "You know," she said, "Brandon's not an easy person to be married to." I turned off the water. I turned around to look at her. Her expression was something I couldn't fully read. Not warm, not hostile. Somewhere in the careful middle. "Why are you telling me that?" I asked. "Because you should know," she said. "His father wasn't easy either. You learn what to do and what not to do. You figure out the rules." She picked up a dish towel, folded it precisely in thirds, and set it on the counter. It's not so bad once you know the rules. I stared at her. Linda, what are the rules? She looked at me for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes. Something that might have been pity, or might have been a warning, or might have been both. You'll figure them out, she said, and she walked out of the kitchen. I stood there with my hands still damp from the sink water, the kitchen quiet around me, and I thought about what she'd just said, the way she'd said it. His father wasn't easy either. Past tense. Brandon's father had died when Brandon was 19, a fact he'd mentioned early on, briefly, without much emotion. I'd never pressed on it. And now here was Linda, on the first full day of my marriage to her son, telling me he wasn't easy. Not apologizing, not explaining, just preparing me. Like this was a weather forecast. Like this was information I would need for the climate I had just moved into permanently. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I had a text from Brandon, sent 6 minutes ago from somewhere upstairs. Can you bring me a water when you come up? I looked at the text. I looked at the kitchen around me. I thought about Jen's voice on the phone. That's a lot of information about a person. I put the phone back in my pocket. I got a glass, filled it with water, and I carried it upstairs because I was still, at that point, trying to believe that this was something we could work through, that the first day was the worst day, that tomorrow would be different. I was wrong about that. Tomorrow was not different. It was considerably worse. Monday morning came in gray and cold, the kind of November gray that settles into your bones and stays there. I was awake before 6. Not because I'd slept well, I hadn't slept more than 3 broken hours, but because the house had its own rhythms and Linda was already moving downstairs by 5:45, those cabinet doors closing with their precise, slightly too hard clicks. And once I heard that sound, I couldn't drift back under. I lay there in the dark guest room with the garment bag of my wedding dress hanging on the closet door like a ghost, and I stared at the ceiling and I thought, okay. Today you figure out what this is. Brandon was still asleep beside me, one arm thrown over his face, breathing slow and even, completely unbothered by the universe. I watched him for a moment in the gray light from the window, the familiar shape of his jaw, the way his hair went in 3 different directions when he slept. And I tried to find the man who'd brought me ranunculus and remembered the name of my dog and said his vows without his voice wavering. He was still there, technically. Same face, same hands. I just couldn't locate him underneath whatever had moved in to replace him the moment we crossed the threshold of his mother's house. I got up quietly, got dressed in the bathroom, and went downstairs. Linda was at the counter with her coffee and the morning news pulled up on a small tablet she kept propped against the fruit bowl. She looked up when I came in. No greeting, just that assessing look, held for a beat, and then back to the screen. I made myself coffee. I sat down. I was thinking, I said after a moment, that I'd call the property management company today about the Oak Park apartment, see if there's any update on the lease timeline. Linda didn't look up from her tablet. Brandon handles that. It's our apartment, I said. I can handle it too. Now she looked up. He has a relationship with them already. It'll be faster if he does it. Linda, I kept my voice even. I'm a CPA. I handle complicated financial documents for a living. I can call a property management company. She held my gaze for a moment. Something in her expression shifted. Not softening exactly, more like recalibrating. I'll mention it to him, she said, and looked back at her tablet. I drank my coffee. I did not throw the mug through the window, though I considered it briefly. By Tuesday, a pattern had established itself with the particular cruelty of things that happen gradually enough that you don't realize they've become permanent until they already are. Every morning, Linda would be in the kitchen before me. Every morning, there would be coffee for herself and for Brandon, and I would get my own. The first time I set out 3 mugs, quietly, just placing them on the counter, Linda moved them back to the cabinet while I was getting milk from the fridge, saying nothing, and I only realized what had happened when I turned around and there were 2 mugs again. I didn't comment. I got a 3rd mug myself, again, and poured my coffee, and sat down, and thought, this is deliberate. This is not an accident. Brandon's behavior had settled into something I can only describe as strategic absence. He was physically present in the house, eating meals, occupying the couch, sleeping in the bed beside me. But emotionally, he had checked out so completely that I began to feel like I was talking to a projection of him rather than an actual person. I'd say something, and there'd be this slight delay before he responded, like a satellite feed with lag, and the response would be just enough to qualify as a response, without actually engaging with anything I'd said. Wednesday morning, I asked him directly, "When are we going to talk about Sunday? The rag, what you said. I need us to actually talk about it." He was scrolling through something on his phone. He didn't look up. "I already explained that. You said I was being dramatic, and I stand by that." He set the phone down and looked at me with that patient, impatient expression. "Ash, you're in my mother's house. She's not young, she's got a bad hip. She can't do everything herself. I thought you'd want to help. I didn't realize that was a federal offense." "It's not about whether I help," I said. "It's about how you asked. I tossed you a rag. You threw it at me and told me to get to work, on our first morning, in front of your mother. And you've been making me pay for it ever since." He picked up his phone again. "This is exhausting, Ashley." I sat with that for a moment. The specific pain of having your legitimate grievance reframed as an attack on him. And then I said, very quietly, "I need us to find an apartment. Soon. The lease isn't finalized. Then let's call them and push. I'll handle it." "Brandon, I said I'll handle it." The phone went down again. His jaw was set now. Can we just have one morning that isn't a whole thing, please?" I looked at him. I thought about the ranunculus. I thought about the card that said, "I thought they seemed like you." I thought about my dad crying at our wedding, and my mom clutching her tissue, and 72 people's worth of love and goodwill. I got up and put my mug in the sink and went upstairs and closed the door. I called my mom that afternoon, sitting on the edge of the guest bed with my voice low because the walls in Linda's house were not thick. "Sweetheart," my mom said, after I'd given her the abbreviated version. "How bad is it?" "I don't know yet," I said. That's the honest answer. I can't tell if this is just adjustment, newlywed stuff, being in his mother's space, or if this is actually who he is. There was a pause. My mom, Carol, has been married to my dad, Dennis, for 34 years. She has navigated 34 years of another person's habits and moods and blind spots with a patience I have always admired and never quite understood. "The rag thing," she said. "Tell me exactly what happened." I told her, all of it, the wet weight of it in my hands, Brandon's face, Linda's coffee mug. Another pause, longer this time. "Ashley," my mom said, "your father has never once thrown anything at me. In 34 years. Not once." I didn't say anything. Not a dish towel, not a set of keys, nothing. Her voice was careful and deliberate. "I want you to think about what that means." "Mom, I know. I'm not telling you what to do," she said quickly. "I'm not. That's not my place. But I need you to hear me. What you're describing is not adjustment. It's not newlywed stuff. People don't treat you that way because they're stressed about a lease. They treat you that way because they've decided it's acceptable to treat you that way." I pressed my palm flat against my knee and stared at the wedding dress in its garment bag. "I know," I said. "Do you have money of your own?" Yes. I'd kept my own checking account, my own savings. We'd talked about combining finances eventually, after the apartment, after things settled. I have my own accounts. Good, my mom said. Keep them that way. For now, just keep them. After we hung up, I sat for a long time without moving. Outside the window, the November sky had gone the color of old concrete. Someone on the street below was raking leaves, the sound of it rhythmic and distant, and I thought, I have been in this house for 4 days. 4 days, and I already feel smaller than I did when I arrived. That was when it hit me. Not as a dramatic revelation, more like a slow, nauseating drop in the stomach, like an elevator missing a floor. The smallness wasn't accidental. It was the point. Thursday was the day Linda said the thing that broke something open in me. I had spent the morning reorganizing my suitcase, an absurd activity, but I needed to feel like I had control over something, even if that something was just the arrangement of my own underwear and sweaters. Brandon had left early, another client thing, and Linda and I were alone in the house for the first time without him as a buffer. She came to the guest room doorway around 10. I didn't hear her coming. She moved quietly in her own house, like she'd learned a long time ago to take up as little space as possible. The bathrooms need cleaning, she said. I usually do them Thursdays. I looked up from my suitcase. I can do them, I said. The supplies are under the hall sink. I cleaned both bathrooms. It took about 45 minutes. I did it thoroughly, the way I'd have done it in my own apartment, with actual attention, because I was trying. I was still, at that point, trying. When I came back downstairs, Linda was in the kitchen making lunch. She glanced at me. "The guest bathroom mirror," she said. "You left streaks." I had not left streaks. I knew I had not left streaks because I had gone over it twice specifically. But I said nothing. I went back upstairs and re-wiped the mirror with a clean cloth until it was flawless. And I looked at my reflection in it. Clear now. No streaks, no smudges. And something in my chest went very quiet and very cold. I texted Jen. "Can you talk tonight?" Not a check-in. I need to actually talk. Her response came in under 30 seconds. "I'll call you at 8. If you need me before that, call me. I will pick up." At dinner, sandwiches again. Brandon had picked them up, same deli, same paper bag. Linda mentioned, conversationally, that her friend Donna's daughter-in-law had given up her job after the wedding. "Donna says it's been so much smoother," she said, directing this at Brandon, not at me. "Having someone home, managing things properly." Brandon made a sound of agreement. He was eating and looking at his phone. I put my sandwich down. "I'm not giving up my job," I said. Linda looked at me. "No one's asking you to." It sounded like, "I was just making conversation," she said. Smooth, unruffled, like I'd overreacted to something entirely neutral. Brandon still hadn't looked up from his phone. I picked my sandwich back up. I finished it. I cleared my plate. I was very careful not to let my hands shake. Jen called at 8 on the dot. I was sitting in the car, Linda's driveway, engine off, just far enough from the house that I could talk without worrying about being heard. It was 28 degrees outside, and I had my coat on, and the windows were starting to fog slightly from my breath. "Okay," Jen said. "I'm here. Tell me everything." I did. All of it. From Sunday through Thursday. The 2 coffee mugs, the laundry basket, the bathroom mirror that had no streaks, the thing Linda had said about Donna's daughter-in-law, the way Brandon had not looked up from his phone when I said I wasn't giving up my job. Jen was quiet through all of it. When I finished, she didn't say anything for a moment. "Ash," she said finally, "you know I love you. And because I love you, I have to ask you something, and I need you to actually answer it." "Okay. Do you think this is going to get better when you get to the Oak Park apartment? Or do you think this is just what your marriage is?" The question sat in the cold car like a physical object. I watched my breath mist and disappear against the windshield. "I think," I said slowly, "that I need more information before I can answer that." That's a very CPA answer. I know. I paused. "Jen, how do I get information without tipping him off that I'm—" I stopped. I didn't even know how to finish the sentence. That I'm already thinking about getting out. Was that what I was thinking? "You call my cousin Michael," Jen said. I blinked. "Your cousin Michael, the family law attorney, yes." Her voice was steady, like she'd been waiting to say this for days. "You don't have to do anything. You just talk to him. You find out what your options are. Information, like you said. That's all." My heart was beating too fast. "Jen, we've been married for 5 days." "I know. People are going to think—" "Ashley." Her voice was firm and quiet and full of something that might have been love. "I don't care what people think. Do you?" I looked at the dark house in front of me. Light in the kitchen window, the shape of Linda moving past it. "No," I said. "Not anymore." "Then I'm going to text you Michael's number right now. You don't have to call him tonight, but save it, okay?" My phone buzzed with an incoming text. I looked at it. "Michael Reyes, family law. Tell him you're my friend. He'll make time." I saved the contact. I stared at it for a moment. The name sitting there in my phone, small and ordinary. The most significant thing I'd done in 5 days. I didn't know yet what I was going to do with it. But I had it. And having it felt like the first breath I'd taken in a week that went all the way down. I called Michael Reyes on a Friday morning, 9 days into my marriage. I sat in my car again. Linda's driveway had become my office, my confessional, the one place in that house where I could breathe without someone measuring the air. And I dialed the number Jen had sent me and waited through 2 rings. "Michael Reyes," he said, professional, unhurried. "Hi, my name is Ashley. I'm Jennifer's friend. She said you might be able to make some time?" A brief pause. "Ashley, yes. Jen mentioned you might call. What's going on?" I hadn't planned what I was going to say. I ended up just telling him the truth, the compressed version. Married 9 days, living in mother-in-law's house, husband's behavior, my own accounts kept separate, no joint assets yet because the Oak Park apartment lease still wasn't finalized. Michael listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Okay, a few things right now, just as a preliminary. And I want to be clear, this is just informational, not formal representation yet." His voice was steady and methodical, and something about that steadiness made me feel like I could breathe. "You said you have separate accounts. Don't change that. Don't move money, don't consolidate, don't let anyone talk you into combining anything until you've spoken to an attorney formally. Second, is your name on any lease, any joint account, anything that creates shared liability right now?" "No," I said. "We were waiting for the Oak Park apartment." "Good. That's actually good for you." He paused. "Ashley, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I will tell you this. If you're calling me 9 days in, you're not overreacting. People don't call family law attorneys on their honeymoon because everything is fine." I pressed my free hand flat against my knee, the way I'd been doing all week. "What do I do right now, today?" "Document everything," he said. "Not obsessively, not in a way that changes how you behave. Just write it down. Dates, times, what was said. If there's ever a moment where something is witnessed by someone else, note who was there. Keep it on your phone in a private note or email it to yourself. Can you do that?" "Yes," I said. "And call me next week. We'll set up a proper consultation." I sat in the cold car for a few minutes after we hung up, watching my breath fog the windshield. Then I opened my notes app and started typing. Sunday morning, first day, the rag, Brandon's exact words, Linda at the kitchen table, what she'd been wearing, the time, approximately 8:15. I wrote it all down. Every morning since then, the 2 coffee mugs, the laundry basket, the bathroom mirror, what Linda had said about Donna's daughter-in-law, the dinner conversations that went past me like I was furniture, Brandon's phone always up, always a barrier. By the time I was done, my thumbs were cold and I had 4 pages. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Sunday, 2 weeks to the day after our wedding. Brandon had announced that his cousin Derek and Derek's wife Patrice were coming for lunch. Not asked, announced at breakfast, like scheduling a meeting. Derek and Patrice are stopping by around noon. Mom's making her pot roast. I looked at him. It would have been nice to know ahead of time. I'm telling you now. It's 9:30, Brandon. He shrugged and picked up his phone. I spent the morning helping Linda with the pot roast, which she allowed in a way that felt less like welcome and more like supervision. I was permitted to peel potatoes and set the table, and twice she repositioned items I'd placed without comment. Just moved them 2 inches to the left, as if the original placement had been a test I'd failed. Derek and Patrice arrived at 12:15. Derek was Brandon's age, 33, broad-shouldered, with the same easy charm Brandon had shown me in the early days. Patrice was warm in a way that felt genuine. She hugged me when she came in the door, said, "We've heard so much about you," and her smile reached her eyes. We sat down to lunch, the 5 of us, and for about 20 minutes it was almost normal. Good food, easy conversation, Patrice asking me about my job, genuinely interested, asking follow-up questions. I felt myself relax slightly, like a muscle that had been clenched for 2 weeks finally getting a moment's rest. Then Linda said it. She said it quietly, conversationally, the way she said everything. No drama, no raised voice, just that measured delivery that made it land like something dropped from a height. "Ashley's having some trouble adjusting," she said to Patrice, reaching for the bread basket. "She's not used to being part of a family that does things a certain way. It's a learning curve." The table went quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Patrice's expression flickered. Something crossed her face that she controlled quickly, but I caught it. Derek looked at his plate. Brandon continued eating. "Actually," I said, and my voice came out steady in a way I was genuinely surprised by, "I haven't had any trouble adjusting. I've been very adaptable." Linda looked at me. "Of course," she said, in the tone that meant the opposite. "What I've found," I continued, and something in me had gone very calm, the way water goes still right before it freezes, is that some of the expectations in this house weren't communicated to me before I got here, which makes it less about my adjustment and more about a gap in communication. Patrice was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Derek had put his fork down. Brandon set his glass down with a small, precise click. "Ashley, I'm just clarifying," I said. "You're embarrassing yourself." And there it was. Those 3 words. Same energy as, "You're being dramatic," just updated. Same function. Take the thing I've said, the legitimate thing, and reframe it as my failure, my flaw, my problem to be ashamed of. "No," I said, "I'm not." I looked at Patrice when I said it. Not Brandon, not Linda. Patrice, who had hugged me at the door and asked real questions about my job, and whose expression right now was doing something complicated and honest. "Patrice," I said, "how long have you been married to Derek?" She blinked. 6 years, she said. "When you got married, did Derek's family communicate expectations to you clearly, or did you have to figure them out on your own?" There was a silence. Patrice looked at Derek. Derek looked at the table. Linda had gone very still. "Ashley, that's enough," Brandon said, his voice dropping. "It's a genuine question." I said enough. Patrice set her fork down. She looked at me with something that I recognized, in that moment, as recognition. The specific way one person looks at another when they see something they've lived through themselves. "It took time," she said carefully. "It wasn't always easy." "Patrice!" Derek's voice was low. "I'm just answering the question." She picked her fork back up, but she kept her eyes on me for one more second, and what was in them was clear as anything. "I see you. I know what this is." That night, after Derek and Patrice had left and the dishes were done and Brandon was upstairs, Linda found me in the kitchen. She stood in the doorway for a moment, and I waited. "That was inappropriate," she said. "What you did at lunch?" "I defended myself," I said. "That's not inappropriate." "You embarrassed Brandon in front of family." "Linda," I turned to face her fully, "you told Patrice I was having trouble adjusting, in front of everyone. You said it like I was a problem you were managing. Do you understand how that felt?" Her expression didn't change. "I was being honest." "No, you were putting me in my place." I kept my voice even, but there was nothing soft about it anymore. "And I need you to understand something. I have been in this house for 2 weeks. I have cleaned your bathrooms, I have peeled your potatoes, I have gotten my own coffee every single morning. I have been patient. I have been quiet. I have tried." I stopped. "I'm done being quiet." She looked at me for a long moment. "Brandon warned me you'd be difficult." Something cold moved through my chest. "He warned you." "Before the wedding." She said it simply, like it was unremarkable. "He said you had a tendency to make things about yourself." I stood with that for a breath. 2 breaths. I thought about 14 months of dating. I thought about ranunculus. I thought about oval diamonds and perfect vows and 72 people's worth of love. I thought about my mom's voice. "Your father has never once thrown anything at me. Not once. In 34 years. "Thank you, Linda," I said. "That's actually very helpful information." I went upstairs. I did not bring Brandon a glass of water. I called Michael Reyes Monday morning, not from the driveway this time. I drove to a coffee shop 6 blocks away and sat in a corner booth with a latte I barely touched. "I'm ready for the formal consultation," I said. "I have a Thursday opening at 2, he said. "Can you make that work?" "Yes." "Bring whatever documentation you have, the notes you mentioned." "I have 4 pages." "Good. That's good, Ashley." On Thursday, I drove to Michael's office in a building downtown, sat across from him at a real desk, and laid out everything. The notes, my financial information, the fact that we had no joint accounts, no shared lease, no commingled assets of any kind. Michael went through it methodically, asking precise questions, taking notes. "Here's where you stand," he said, at the end. "You have been married for 17 days. You have no joint property, no joint debt, no joint accounts. Illinois is an equitable distribution state, but with a 17-day marriage and 0 marital assets, there is very little to distribute. The process would be relatively straightforward." He paused. "I want to be clear. The decision is entirely yours. But from a legal and financial standpoint, your position right now is about as clean as it gets." I nodded slowly. "What do I do first?" "You file a petition for dissolution of marriage. I can prepare that. You'll need to be served, he'll be served. There's a waiting period. Given no shared assets and no children, it's unlikely to be complicated." He looked at me. "Do you want me to prepare it?" I thought about Brandon's face when he threw that rag, the boredom in it, the contempt that was already fully formed, already settled in, on the first morning of our marriage. I thought about, "You're being dramatic," and "You're embarrassing yourself," and "He warned me you'd be difficult." That last one. The one that told me everything. He'd been building his case against me before we even said our vows. Yes, I said. Prepare it. I served Brandon on a Tuesday. Michael had connected me with a process server, a calm, efficient woman named Rosa, who arrived at Linda's house at 9 in the morning, while I sat in my car 2 streets over, phone in hand, heart thudding. Jen was on the phone with me. She'd been on the phone with me since 7. Rosa just texted, I said. She's at the door. Breathe, Jen said. I'm breathing. Keep doing that. My phone buzzed with a text from Rosa. Served, he accepted. Have a good day. I sat in the car and I breathed, and I did not cry, which surprised me. I thought I would cry. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in 3 weeks. A specific lightness, like a pressure I'd gotten so used to that I'd stopped noticing it had just been lifted. Done, I told Jen. She made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Come over, right now. I have wine and I have that Thai place on the walkie you've been wanting to try, and we are ordering everything on the menu. I started the car. I drove away from Linda Kowalski Street in Elmhurst, Illinois, and I did not look in the rearview mirror. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. Quick, clean, just like Michael said. No shared assets, no children, no complications. Brandon's attorney sent one aggressive letter trying to claim I owed something for the cost of the wedding venue, which Michael handled in approximately 1 paragraph. I paid my legal fees out of my savings account, which I had kept exactly as my mother told me to. Brandon never called me, not once, in the whole process. I don't know if that says something about him or something about how little the marriage had ever really been about me at all. Patrice texted me 3 weeks after the service. She'd gotten my number from somewhere. I never asked how. The text said, I just want you to know I respect what you did. I hope you're okay. I texted back, I'm getting there. Thank you for what you did at lunch. She replied with a single heart emoji. I saved that text. I moved back to Chicago, back to Wicker Park. Not into the old apartment with Jen. She'd gotten a place with her boyfriend by then. But a 1-bedroom 4 blocks away that I chose myself, signed myself, furnished myself. The first morning I made coffee in my own kitchen with 3 mugs on the counter because I felt like it. I stood there for a moment and just looked at them. 3 mugs. Nobody to tell me I only needed 1. My credit score, which I had been anxious about because joint applications can sometimes affect things, was untouched. My 401k was untouched. My savings were lighter by the cost of a divorce attorney and a security deposit, and I considered that the best money I had ever spent. My mom came to visit in February. We made green bean casserole with the right brand of fried onions, which my mom drove to 2 different stores to find because that's who she is. And we ate it at my kitchen table and talked for 4 hours. At one point, she reached across the table and put her hand over mine. I'm proud of you, she said. Not because you left, because you trusted yourself. I thought about the woman in Linda's guest bathroom mirror, the one in the ivory blouse with the wet mark across the front, asking herself if she was still in there. I thought about the car in the driveway at 28 degrees, the foggy windshield, the moment I saved a contact in my phone and felt the first real breath in a week go all the way down. I was still in there. I just had to find my way back to her. That took about 3 weeks and cost me a marriage that, if I'm honest, never really was one. What it gave me back was everything else. My apartment, my savings, my Sunday morning FaceTime calls, my cast iron skillet, my name, my life. The dirty rag is still the clearest thing in my memory from that whole period. Not because it was the worst thing that happened. It wasn't, not by a long stretch. But because of what it was. The first honest moment of the marriage. Everything before it had been performance. That rag, thrown at me on a Sunday morning in my ivory blouse, was Brandon finally telling me the truth about what he thought I was worth. I just happened to be paying attention.